So, welcome everybody to Live Performance Australia's Greener Live Performances Through Energy Efficiency webinar. Thanks for everyone for attending. We're hoping to really drill down into what energy efficiency means for outdoor events using mobile power generators, and specifically looking at siting and sizing and distribution of mobile power generators. You may have seen some resources that we've developed so far from the Live Performance Australia program, and they've been developed in coordination with a number of organisations, Green Shoot Pacific, which is my organisation, Dynamic Eco Solutions, and also EC3 Global. So you'll have a good look on the website if you'd like to at the wonderful diagnostic tools, fact sheets, checklists, operation guides, etc. that we've produced, and will be continuing to produce right through until 2015. So today what we want to have a look at is what energy efficiency really means for outdoor events using mobile power. In a general situation, the term energy efficiency for a building is very easy to understand, but with mobile power generators, things get a little bit tricky. So we're going to be drilling down into concepts such as optimizing capacity, sizing and siting, and of course how we actually measure efficiency. I want to hear from everybody on the webinar today. This is really a role for me to be a facilitator and for you to share your challenges, your tricks of the trade, and how you actually achieve efficiency at your events and what efficiency means for you. As you can see on the screen, efficiency purely means, in a definition sort of case, of using less energy to achieve the same effect. So that's what I want to have a look at today and see what that really means for our situation in outdoor events. So obviously we've got concepts such as reducing the total fuel used, and there's many ways that we can get to that point. We can reduce the number of the size of the generators. We could look at more efficient loading, of course, and even running generators for shorter hours and powering them down completely. I think for me it means fewer, smaller, and shorter running generators, but I really want to hear what it means for you. So the first thing obviously that we need to look at is to understand what our power demand is going to be, knowing your power. And that's been the crux of most of the Live Performance Australia's resources to date when we're looking at mobile power generators. As you'd know, I'm sure all of the site managers and event managers on the call today and all of the generator providers and suppliers and electricians know that estimating your power demand is absolutely the key to becoming efficient, to be planning in your generator sizes and how many you need and where you're going to place them is the ultimate for efficiency to be achieved. And so knowing your power, I think, is the preeminent issue at hand today. So what I'd like to do is hear from as many of you on the call today about how you've managed to actually achieve energy efficiency or what you think energy efficiency actually is and what it means for you. I know that we've got people on the call today from Falls Festival. We've got Sydney Festival, I hope, on the call. I know that we've got Coates Hire on the call today, as well as I can see somebody from Royal Botanic Gardens, and I'm sure there's a couple of other people that I've missed out as well. So I'm wondering, perhaps, firstly, we might go to Coates Hire and see what they have to say about, what their main concerns are with being able to provide the right specifications in terms of the sizing and number of generators to event clients. I think that's probably a really good place to start. So on the call today, we have Corey and also Sonia from Coates Hire. So perhaps we can hear from Corey to start with.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Yeah. I'm going to pass this one to Steve Lincoln, our product expert.
Okay.
He's well positioned to answer this question. Steve, you're on the line, mate.
Yeah, I hope Steve's on the line. Steve's coming up on our web viewer, but his audio doesn't seem to be working as yet.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
that's okay. So I know that we've got Chris from Falls Festival, and I know that we've got Abby from Falls Festival, and I'm wondering maybe while we wait for Steve to come on the line, whether we can hear from an event manager's point of view. What are the challenges in being able to estimate power demand, and how do you go through that process to actually end up working out the number and the size of generators? And do you find yourself in a situation where you either have overspec or underspec? Does it completely rely on, event knowledge and gut feel of what you have done before and will do in the future, or do you really rely on very specific, science and getting quite a lot of detail from potential power users? So, Chris, I know that you're on the call. Would you be happy to talk to some of those points from a site manager's point of view?
Yeah, sure. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Well, I think particularly from a catering perspective, we put a lot of work in to get each and every demand from the caterer so then we can have a really good idea of the power demand that they require. Obviously with us, we have a number of caterers, so we'll do a few different areas of generators, so we can sort of have a really good idea of the power requirements by just simply getting all of their materials and what they plan to use during the show.
Yeah, okay. And do you use any specific, uh, worksheets, or in when you're contracting people in, or in various, communications that you have with people? Do you formalize it?
Abby could probably comment more on that from an operations point of view. I think Abby's on the line at the minute.
Yeah, she is. Abby, what have you got to share on that?
Yes. Hi guys, can you hear me as well?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Great. As far as the caterers go, part of their actual official application form is them detailing exactly how many 10 amp plugs they require, how many 15 amp, whether they require three phase. So it really is quite specific and recorded during that application process. Then if between the application and the actual show their requirements change, then we're in constant communication with them and ask for any updates. And then just before the show, we give them a copy of all the information that they've given us and ask them to review that before the actual show day. And then if they do want more power, then we charge them accordingly when they get on site. So it's really specific for the caterers and the market stalls to be able to measure that. But I think for the rest of the site, it's kind of the site managers who estimate what we've had in the past. Production obviously are able to give some pretty specific requirements of what they need, but we do work really hard across the rest of the site to group generators and areas like that. But it's definitely specific for the caterers, but the rest of the site is the site managers' brilliance and experience to figure out what we need.
Yeah, okay. Have you got either real information or a good gut feel, knowing the numbers of generators that you've placed around a site and their sizes, what your proportion of of power demand would be, say, from the catering sort of site facility side of things compared with stages, so AV? You,
Berto, can you answer
yeah,
that one?
yeah. I'll just unmute Chris. Hang on a moment. Sorry about that. There we go. You're
Yeah.
unmuted.
Hi, I'm back on here. Sorry, can you repeat the question, Megan?
So the question was, do you have a good feel? Hang on, I'm just going to mute Abby. I think we've got some background noise thing going on. What the question was, do you have a good feel on how much energy is demanded by your caterers compared to AV? Have you, obviously you can do it by counting out the number of generators, but if you had to sort of, 60-40, 20-80, 70-30 it, what would you say is the proportion of power demand from your caterers and site requirements compared to your stages, just to put it in sort of perspective?
Look, to overall, we had like at our event last year, we had 34 generators. So
Yeah.
from our stages are limited. We have two major stages, so really it's a small percentage of our total generators overall. The Lawn Festival that I work on has been going for 21 years now, so we have a really good idea of the power requirements, and we've basically set up our site to be semi-permanent. A few years we implemented we went underground around the entire site so we can minimise our use of generators. So basically it's been 21 years in the making to get to where we are now.
Yeah.
And so ultimately what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of generators we use on site.
Okay.
So it's working with our production team and our caterers and 21 years of statistics, I guess, to know what is required.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Unfortunately, many events don't have the pleasure of having that long, deep history to draw on. And I know that you've got a lot of continuity with your team as well. So that knowledge is absolutely incredibly valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
When you're talking about reducing the number of generators, are you talking about reducing total kVA at the same time, or are you talking about reducing your distribution, so putting more onto larger generators? What's the way that you're trying to go there?
Yeah, well, a bit of both actually. But what we're trying to do, what we've managed to do in the last few years is maintain the same amount of generators that we've had, but our site is growing. So yeah, we've been able to loop different areas by just maybe in one area, say for instance, getting a larger generator and then linking that to more areas. For example, our backstage area has just grown and grown with our VIPs and backstage artist area, but we've been able to maintain the same sort of generator in that area, but also power different parts of the site on that same generator.
Okay, so
just by going underground.
Okay, that's really good. So that is definitely a good trick that a lot of those with permanent sites are doing, is putting that distribution in so that they can rationalize the number of generators. Obviously, there's impacts with regards to delivering them to remote sites, but yeah, getting more bang for your buck, I guess, in that case. We will hear hopefully from some generator techs coming up, to talk about the effects on fuel consumption when you have a smaller number of larger generators that perhaps aren't being utilized all of the time, because we see the reverse of that happening in some scenarios where the most efficient option is actually to have more generators and more smaller generators, so that it enables you to power them completely down when they're not needed. So I think what we find is that both solutions are actually very relevant, but it completely depends on your scenario, which makes, of course, giving advice very tricky, because every single event scenario needs, personal attention, obviously. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to mute you now, Chris, so that you can cough or take phone calls in the background. Now, I know that we've got Stephen from Coates Hire on the line, but Stephen, when we're looking at you on the phone sort of dashboard, it has no phone next to your name, so I'm not sure how you're actually connected with us. Perhaps Sonia, you can enlighten us. You have to press #8# to enable muting on your phone, but maybe in the meantime we can talk to Corey, and he might be able to give us some feedback on a generator company's point of view while we try and work out how we can get Stephen on the line. No, it doesn't sound like we've got Corey there at all. Okay, so what I might do now, I know that we've got Mick Jessup from Sydney Festival on the line as well, and Mick, you're calling in via the phone. You have to press #27# to enable your muting so that we can hear you. It did sound like we just had someone just come on the line now. Was that Stephen, or was that Sonia, or was that perhaps Corey? No, we didn't have anybody come on the line at all. Okay, so what I'd like to do... No, I can hear somebody. Who's that out there that I can hear?
Corey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear Corey.
Oh,
Okay.
there we go.
Yeah, great.
Okay, good.
Thanks,
Just,
Corey. We want to hear.
no worries.
We do want to hear from Stephen, but we're not unable to get him on the audio, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. So, Corey, you may need to opt in from Coates' point of view. Looking,
Okay.
what we're discussing is how the generator companies are receiving information from the event managers in order to make really accurate and efficient estimations on generator sizing.
Yeah, I think our sort of best work is when we work close with the event organizers around where to position generators. You know, we offer a service where we can help you, advise you on the lowest amount of cable to be used. So you obviously where your biggest load is, you put your biggest generator, and try and distribute from there, limiting the cable run obviously so you don't have volt drop, and peripheral generators. For catering and those type of things, we can help size for those.
Yeah.
I think the events that are like, you know, Chris and they were saying at 21 years old, there's not much value we can add because they probably have a very good handle on it.
Yeah.
It's a sort of younger, newer event that we really come into our own with sizing the generator, making sure we have the right distribution equipment, you know, in terms of outlets on them, because they wouldn't have been that far down the road in terms of putting permanent distribution in it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, I think our previous teleconference we spoke about using, you know, energy efficient equipment and advising that, you know, it's probably best to steer clear from Bay Marines because they draw a lot of power, you know, that type of stuff.
Yeah, well,
Rather than steer the end user towards a more energy efficient setup, the caterers.
yeah, for sure. And I'd like to explore the concepts of energy efficient equipment on power generators, and when we're switching off equipment but the generator is still running, or when we're putting more efficient equipment on a generator but not changing the generator size. I think that a lot of event organizers would like to know, you know, in a house, obviously, or a building, you turn the lights off, you're stopping power demand and you're reducing, obviously, your cost as well as your greenhouse gas emissions. But for a mobile generator, it's very different. And so I'd like to try and explore and get the answer, I guess, really for event organizers and for power users, that if they go with that sort of efficiency feeling of turning things off and being as frugal as possible, putting energy efficient equipment onto generators, what does that actually mean if the generator's turned on and chugging away? Is it going to react to that demand, or is the fuel just still getting consumed? Have we got our foot on the accelerator but we're not going anywhere? You know, what's the real story here?
I think it's good to start off that a generator runs at 1500 RPM.
Okay.
So you have a base fuel consumption, just if it's chugging away without load. So your biggest benefit is to size it accurately. Say running at 70 to 80% of its load. There you get the best, bang for your money in terms of fuel consumption. If you have all that energy efficient equipment running and on the generator and you're switching them off, you won't see that big a difference in the fuel consumption, unfortunately. It's probably at the starting point with the sizing where you get the biggest benefit. And obviously, if you go to a smaller generator, you're saving the daily rate of that too. So there's a cost saving involved with that too.
Okay.
But we can measure that for you in terms of what's the difference in fuel consumption rate from say 100 to 150 kVA, and over a 4-day event that could be significant.
Okay, so there's a real lesson to be learned there. Is it's like hiring a car. You're hiring a V8 or you're hiring a 1.3 litre car. So at the outset, you're going to have a higher fuel consumption for a larger generator. So the risk is if you're not using the capacity, that's when you're becoming inefficient.
Correct.
So I guess that overall for an efficient event, you want to have smaller power demand. But if you have certain production values and you've got things that need to be powered, you've got 100 food stores and they all need to have Bay Marie's or whatever.
Yes.
That's sort of a given. So where you sit then with your efficiency is to ensure that you're using the right size generator and that it is being used at the optimal load as much as possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Now, I know we've got Mick Jessup on the line, and Mick's from Sydney Festival, so we might hear from him. And I've got a specific question for you, Mick. I'm just going to mute Corey so we don't have him in the background. I'll just check first that, Mick, you can hear me okay and that we're able to hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you, Megan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great. That's great. Thank you.
Fantastic.
So what I'm interested in is the whole powering down of generators, because we've heard from Falls Festival that the technique that they're using with a permanent site that they own or have permanent access to, they can put distribution in, therefore they can condense their generator requirements, have fewer and larger generators. They're working on a lot of history and they know their power demand, so they can pretty much bet that they're going to be optimally using those generators in an event that obviously can't dig trenches and put permanent temporary power distribution in. It's a bit of a different situation, and one of the techniques is to use smaller generators so that you're able to actually power them down completely, affecting an efficiency outcome, obviously. And I know at Sydney Festival, with overnight loads, that's something that you guys have looked at. So I'm wondering if you can share any tips from Sydney Festival.
Yeah, look, essentially what we do with our sort of main outdoor event in Hyde Park is that we do work with the supplier to figure out, what the capacities are going to be and what our requirements are in each area of the park. However, it's a bit interesting because sometimes we need to have a high capacity generator to power all the nighttime activities. However, then when we throttle it back overnight, we do have to have generators in use 24/7 because we need to keep fridges and freezers and all that sort of things running.
Yes.
And while we do try and get that infrastructure powered by like the local park power, sometimes it's just not feasible with cable runs and all that sort of stuff. So
Okay.
yeah, we work quite closely with the supplier to figure it all out. But yeah, at the end of the day, sometimes we do have quite large generators purring away to run a couple of reefers.
Yeah, okay. And the reefers are a big power pool. They're the refrigerated shipping containers, basically, aren't they?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that you put all your beer in. Yeah, so I think that's you've hit on something there that I have seen come through, and I've been discussing with a lot of event organisers, that obviously if there's mains power available, this is what you want to be taking first up, and putting your 24-hour loads onto that is probably the best thing, because then you can actually shut your generators down. So I think that's definitely a trick. Now, Mick, I'm interested, with the concept of energy efficiency, how would you describe it at an event, in the types of events that you're involved with? Are you talking about optimizing your generator loads? Are you talking about using energy efficient equipment and being able to reduce the total generator sizes? What does energy efficiency really feel like for you, given your experience and the types of events that you work on?
Yeah, look, it's certainly something that we consider when we're planning all our different events, whether they be outdoors or indoors as well. We're often talking to venues about, any sort of green action plans that they have in place and how we can work in with them. With the outdoor events as well, it's something that we incorporate. We do have internally here a green action policy at Sydney Festival. And look, while we do always, try and be as energy efficient as we can, we also have, budgets to meet, and so sometimes there are significant cost implications with, using a more energy efficient method. And so these are things that, like, every year we look at what we've done, and then we look at what we can do better the following year.
Yeah, okay. That's really good. We're going to talk about measuring in a moment as well, so we'll hear from people about what they've done to track and measure their power. Obviously, it's very beneficial to do to find out, what to plan for next year, but also to come up with an overall efficiency rating of your event is, I think, something that we need to be working towards as well. Thanks, Mick.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'm going to mute you now. And I see that we've also got some other people on the call who I've not spoken with yet. What I'd like to do is, if you've got any specific questions, please put them in the chat box so that we can bring them up for discussion. Abby's put some tips and tricks there into the chat box as well, which you can read. Now, I know that we have heard from Coates already, and when I was talking to them before this call, they gave me a few little tips as well that they thought I should include. And one that I really liked was the using lighting towers as generators. So obviously, with lighting towers, a lot of events are using those to light car parks or entries, or for security purpose on the perimeter, etc. But they have power outlets on them as well, and so I thought that it was a really great way of doubling up your power distribution by using lighting towers on generators as well. Now, using your lighting towers as generators as well. Now, I know that we've got Cameron Little on the call today, and I'm going to unmute him in a moment. He's been involved in using solar power at events, and I think that there's something that we can learn from solar power. Obviously, it's not a situation where right now major music festivals in Australia are going to be using solar power to run their staging, or even obviously all of their catering, but what somebody has to go through, what an organizer has to go through to be able to use these solar powered kits, I think is something that we can really learn from. And so I'd like to talk to oops, sorry, I've just gone a bit crazy on my slides there. I'd like to talk to Cameron to see what he's got to say about lessons learned from putting things on power diets, for example, at events on solar. Now, Cameron, I've unmuted you, so hopefully we can hear you.
Good morning, Megan. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yes, I've been running some solar trailers that are essentially mobile solar-powered generators at events, running different equipment for a number of years now. And I guess the key messages would be to reiterate some of the things that people have been speaking about regarding the petro generators, but just to emphasise the matching of the load to the generator is a little bit more complex, in that you've got to match, it's not a matter of just flipping a switch, you've got to match the amount of the sizing of the inverter so that you can bring it back to a 240, and also you've got to manage the size of the battery bank that you've got. So I know some people for daytime events, when they're running solar, tend to rely on having a lot of solar panels themselves and less batteries. My preference is to have a heavier load of batteries, and certainly to have panels, plenty of panels there, but to make sure that you've got a really significant store of batteries. Otherwise, if it becomes cloudy and the load is, or it moves into the evening and the load is greater than you're expecting, you could find yourself particularly stuck.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the concept of a power diet. With normal power generators running on fuel, we seem to be in a scenario where we ask the power users what they need, and then we make sure that we have enough to cover that. And it seems as though the opposite is true with solar power, and this is where I think there's a lesson to be learned, that you very heavily regulate and work with the potential power users around what they want to power, and work out how they can reduce that, because it becomes quite a finite resource unless you've got a massive battery bank or a huge array of solar arrays. So, whilst solar power is obviously infinite, given a certain time period, it's not. So I think the whole concept of power diets and putting challenges back on power users is a really important way for us with diesel power generators to be able to reduce the size of those generators, therefore reducing the fuel consumption in total as well as per hour. So have you seen that? Have you seen pushback so for artists, for example, you've got a stage, you're solar powering a stage with 6 bands across a 6-hour period or something, and they all want to come with all the bells and whistles. Is there a way to engage them into the whole concept of power diets?
Yes, certainly there is. It's a matter of communicating with everybody well in advance that the intent is to run the stage or parts of the stage or other elements of the event on solar in advance. So I've worked on a larger size stage. It's a reasonably small stage though. It's in a community event, but a large community event with live music all day. And what we ended up doing was powering a section of the stage. So we didn't power all of the equipment because we didn't want to push the inverter harder than we wanted to be comfortable with. So even though there is the batteries and the panels, really the big thing is the inverter, because you can have enough power to supply it, but if you can't suck it out of the battery fast enough, then you're going to have a brownout and overload your inverter. And I have had that happen on an event where somebody else borrowed one of my trailers, and they normally hire it for using for AV. And in this instance, they didn't tell me, but they planned to use it to power a jumping castle.
Oh, yes. So it's an air compressor.
Yeah, and so they hadn't really, they'd never used it on a jumping castle or anything of that nature before. So I got this panicked call because normally I would be there. In this instance, they said, no, we've got it covered, and they did. I've worked with them plenty of times. I know that they know what to look for, but they didn't pay attention to the fact that motors have starting loads, and also they were sort of going on what the consumption, what they assumed the consumption would be on a steady load, rather than having to have a big jolt at the start.
Yeah, okay. That's a big trick for solar power, that's for sure. I don't want to go too far into the nuances of solar today, though. But so we're looking for things learned, that are going to be relevant for diesel generators.
Well, I guess it comes back to the diet, knowing in advance what people are planning to use, and also if there's any doubt, checking the actual consumption of the equipment, because sometimes what people assume it's going to use based on what they've been told by a hire company is not actually what it will use.
Yeah, okay.
So there's some key traps for young punters to try to avoid.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to mute you now, Cameron, and we're going to try and speak with Stephen again. So here we go. Let's see what we can see. So Stephen, it doesn't sound like we can still hear you. I'm sorry about this for everybody. Yes, Stephen, is that you?
There?
Yes, okay, so I've unmuted everybody, so everyone be quiet and I'll just slowly go through and mute everyone. But yeah, let's hear what you've got to say, Stephen.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, one of the biggest advice that I can give to everybody is that and it was just highlighted in actually the solar information, that the actual connected load that we see, the generators, is generally grossly oversized. So the details when you create a set of load profiles for your event, and the information you can get from stall holders or audio people or lighting people is very, very important in assisting in determining what is the best, most suitable generator. I actually typed a few things there if people have been reading the chat column there.
Yeah, okay.
A couple of points. Another point that I wanted to bring up was that the corralling of generators and into those loads that we've been spoken about before, about the loads that need to run 24/7, the loads that can be turned on and off. Okay. The other thing is we don't want to see too lightly loaded generators, because then the efficiency of the generators aren't working at their optimal best.
Yeah.
We can also see a loss of efficiency of our generators where the machines are subject to long light loads put on machines.
Yeah, that actually damages the generators, doesn't it? It's not good for them at all.
It does. The rules of thumb we use are we try not to put less than 30% load on a generator,
Yeah.
and we try to operate the machine in about the 80% of its rating range, and that seems to give us the best reliability and efficiency over the machines.
Yes.
The other thing is the larger generators are the more efficient generators in terms of turning mechanical energy into electrical energy.
Okay, that's good to know.
Versus the smaller units.
Yeah. And so could you opt in on the discussion around the wasted energy opportunity? If you've got one of these larger generators on, we know that they're going to use more fuel per kilowatt hour. But if you're not drawing down that power, so you are starting to come down into the 50, 40, 30% range of its actual potential output, are you just wasting fuel? Where does the generator have the ability, or most generators have the ability to sort of adjust their power output to a point? And is there a point where you're just going to be burning fuel off into smoke and you're just completely wasting? What's the story there?
Okay, the position on that is that the generators, as Corey mentioned earlier, generally operated at around 1500 RPM, except for those little small noisy things that you hear on some small events.
Yeah.
Now, as loads applied to the generator, the governor of the engine says, I need more fuel to provide fuel to burn to meet that load demand.
Okay.
So obviously, as you increase load, fuel burn goes up. As you decrease load, fuel burn goes down. So, yes, if you take your load off your generator at the end of the day and just let it sitting there with nothing on it, there's a certain amount of fuel that will still be burnt just to keep that machine operating at 1500, but nowhere near what it would be under load conditions.
Okay, so there is, yeah. So it sort of it depends is your answer, really, isn't it? So you've got a baseline amount of fuel that's going to be consumed. It's almost in the idling sort of scenario, and it's going to be using more fuel for more power output as demand grows. So in that way, it is responding to your power demand by the things that you're putting on it, but you've got a baseline of you're going to be using this fuel whether power's being pulled or not. So it's
that's correct. There are some small generators that are variable speed machines.
Yes.
And they probably have some better fuel performance than standard 1500 RPM governed machines. But they're really only available in very, very small kilowatt ratings these days. They haven't made it up into the big time just yet.
Yeah, okay.
So that probably answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I think it would be really interesting if there was a ready reckoner table to say, for these different size gen sets, so 150, 250, 400, whatever, what the idle rate or very low load rate fuel consumption is, so that you get a sense of importance or urgency around ensuring, if you're going to go with a larger gen set, what that really means for total fuel used if you're not going to be using the generator power. So I think that's probably one of the best outcomes that we've come to today from this discussion is to maybe develop that resource so that people really understand, what they're going to be wasting or losing by not optimizing that particular generator. Obviously, in everything to do with events and life, really, you've got to balance priorities, and so production performance is a huge priority for events, and so you have to have that power on standby to be available. But there is some juggling, I'm sure, that can be done, so that you've really got your eye on the ball to go, okay, this is the beast that we've got to keep at 70 to 80%. These other three smaller generators, we're okay to lose a bit in that, but we're going to be losing a lot if we don't optimize this particular gen set. Would you agree that that's an option, to take?
Yeah, I would. I think someone touched on it earlier. I think using the large generators and everybody goes home at the end of the day ready for the next day. They just don't leave a large generator sitting there with one small globe on it when the next day it's required to deliver 200 kilowatts of load. So
Yeah.
I think, where you can turn machines off, then you're starting to improve your fuel efficiency of your event.
Yeah.
Wherever you can, but it's balancing it out between what is an essential load versus what's not essential.
Yeah. Now, I think you've touched on something there that generator companies have told me as well, is they're surprised the number of times they'll turn up the next morning to pick up their kit from the show the night before, and it's just left there whirring because, everyone's just sort of flopped over the line at the end of the big day and nobody's forgotten to go and turn the generator off. Do you see that very often? Or is that just, one-off story that somebody's told me and it's not really the case?
No, it's definitely not a one-off story, and yes, that happens all the time, especially where paid store holders pack up and go home. They're no longer selling their goods, or the event's starting to wind down, and by the end of the day, there's nobody left there, and everybody's still doing other things, but all the store holders have gone home.
Yeah. So that's something, in terms of process and site inductions and stuff that you really need to have your eye on that ball as well. That's for the event managers in the room, of course. I'm seeing lots of chats happening in the chat box, so do have a look at that. If you've got any questions to ask, please do ask. I think we worked out, Steve, what was happening before. You're on the phone with Sonia, and you're on the web under your name. So I was muting Sonia before. That's what's been happening with the problem with your audio. So I'm just going to...
Thank you.
I'm going to mute you now. So you'll see on the screen we've got a... Sorry, I'm just trying to mute everyone and talk at the same time. It's clearly not working. We've got a few tips on the screen, and one of the things that I really liked, and I've personally experienced this, is using the hand-loadable Dizzy boards, the distribution boards and boxes that you use. When I was working on an event in the UK, actually 2 events, one was Reading Festival and one was Leeds Festival, and one of the festivals had distribution boards, Dizzy boards, that they could move around just on hand pallet jack sort of scenarios, or even little hand trolleys, compared with the other event, though I can't remember which was which, but the other event, the Reading or the Leeds, they needed forklifts to move their stuff around. And it had quite a big flow-on impact for the overall resource use for those events. Obviously, we needed people, time, forklift availability and fuel consumption to get that stuff all around these massive sites, and also the actual transport of truckloads of getting this stuff to site. So whereas the little hand loadable distribution boxes and boards were able to just be beautifully stacked up quickly into a truck, it was quite a mission to pack the trucks with the forkliftable distribution boards. So that's something to have a look at as well. If you're looking at choosing between suppliers and you've got a large number of generators and a big amount of distribution, get down into that detail as well and have a look at what that means. So we've talked a bit about actually knowing what your energy efficiency is, and that obviously comes down to measuring. And so we're going to talk about measuring generator fuel consumption in kilowatt hours and trying to come up with an actual efficiency rating. So you can see that on the screen, I've got a screenshot of a spreadsheet which is available via the Life Performance Australia project. It enables you it's a series of worksheets behind this front page where you can track the generator number, the size, the location, the running hours, the amount of fuel used, etc. And that will give you some great history, so you can get to the point where Falls Festival are, where they've got a fantastic resource of 20 years of knowledge. And so hopefully this spreadsheet will help you. But you can see on the screen that we've drilled it down into things that should be measured. So the number of generators, clearly, how many actual gensets have you got on site you're going to be using, and the total KVA. I think that's a really important thing to log and to reflect on from event to event to see how you're going. Now, obviously, one event to the next may have different circumstances, different number of traders, different types of stage equipment, numbers of stages even. So you obviously need to be aware of any changing variables for your event layout. But it's certainly a good thing to track. Fuel consumption, the amount of fuel used per generator, and as well as in total, something that should definitely be measured. The running hours, really, really important, because that puts the whole thing in perspective. There's no use saying, oh, we had this number of generators and we use that much fuel, but you haven't also tracked how long the things were turned on. That completely puts it in context. And the true measure of efficiency, or a true measure of efficiency, as we've heard, is optimizing the power load on these generators. So getting them in that 70 to 80% sweet spot for as much of the time as possible is an important aspect as well. Now, I saw that there was a note from Abby up earlier saying that monitoring use and hours and logging fuel is all very labour intensive, and if you don't have the resources, the people or volunteers to check each generator multiple times a day, is there any technology or any hire companies that can do that reporting? Now, I probably will throw back to Corrie in a moment about that. I'm going to unmute Corrie as well as Sonia, because Steve might have something to say as well. But I do know there's also an amazing piece of technology that Aggreko generator company have. It's not completely available all of the time, but it is something that you can look to request. And they have some back to base monitoring where they can monitor generators' kilowatt hour consumption, and it pings it back to a central server. So that's something in terms of innovation that's happening into the future, and we probably will see all generator companies go that way eventually. But let's hear from Coates to see what they might have to say around that. I'm just going to have to unmute Sonia, which I don't seem to be able to do. So what I'm going to do is unmute Corrie. Oh, and Corrie's not on the line anymore, so I'm going to have to forge ahead and try and unmute Sonia. Let's see.
Am I here?
Yes, you are. Got a bit of reverb though, so keep going, talk, and I'll unreverb you.
Okay, how's that?
Very great.
That's all done?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, we have some instrumentation in our machines along the same lines of Aggreko, yes, and we're in the same situation. We have that remote monitoring availability on some machines, not on all our machines. You know, we have somewhere in the order of about 7,500 assets, so it becomes a bit of a problem to put that on everything.
Yeah, of course.
But what's in a number of our controllers, or at least the last 4 years of introduction of new machines to our fleet, is we actually have a lot of machines fitted with kilowatt hour meters.
Okay.
So at the start, you there?
Yes,
Hello?
yes.
Yeah. At the start of an event, the kilowatt hour reading can be taken off the controllers on a number of machines. At the end of the event, the same can be, and you can work out your total kilowatt hours that way. We also have some logging functionality in the machines. We can actually log at set points in the machine. So every 5 minutes or every 15 minutes, we can actually see what loads on the machines. But, you know, this stuff's in its infancy. It's only been around the last few years.
Yeah.
As time goes on, you'll see more and more of this stuff available. But we readily use all that gear now.
Yeah, okay. And so what about fuel? I mean, what are the tricks to the trade of measuring fuel consumption? Because lots of different events are dealing with fuel in different ways. We see some events where it's almost like a dry hire of the generator sort of thing, and they come fueled up and they return fueled, but the event organizer arranges the fuel, you know, during the show. Then we've got other ways where, you know, the generator company is also fueling. And I mean, what's the technology? I mean, what, apart from sitting there and going, oh, I just put a jerry can into a generator and that's 10 litres, how can you actually measure fuel easily? Obviously, there's Bowser scenarios, but, you know, what do you suggest?
That's the only way we can do it. It's got to go through a Bowser or a metering device to go into the fuel, you know. And it also depends upon the the size of the fuel tanks in the machine. Some generators only have 12-hour tanks in them. Some have 24-hour tanks. Some may even have bigger than that. But
So,
really, the only way to measure it is, that's why we supply the machines full of fuel.
yeah,
And if we return it full of fuel, then you know exactly by the fueling company, the refueler that's been employed for the event, how
yeah,
many litres have been used. But
yeah.
provided you don't double up on, ancillary equipment, as in forklifts or vehicles,
Yeah, of
or
course. Yeah.
you need to isolate your power usage
Okay. So it's
or
pretty
your fuel
much
consumption.
a doing job. You have to look at your scenario and work out how you're gonna work out how much fuel's getting put into each genset. I'm wondering, is it easy if you were a lay site manager or event manager, or you were giving the job to an intern or something to go around and work out the fuel consumption, and what they were doing is just looking at when the techs were filling up the tanks. Can you walk to a generator and look on a label and see what size the fuel tank is, or is there a gauge that says it's half full and it's that many liters? Is there something like that to look
generally,
for?
Megan, the machines all have a fuel gauge on there. You would need to know the specifics of what fuel tank's in there. Generally, we will tell somebody after they tell us what their expected load is, we'll say, oh, you'll need to refuel that at the end of the day. Or we do a lot of events where we'll say to somebody, look, this fuel tank in this machine, you're going to do, your load won't exceed that. You'll be able to run it all weekend. So generally, if we know that, but going back to those initial details about making sure you know what the load is, we as a hire company can give you the information to say, hey, we'll have to refuel this tonight or tomorrow or whenever.
Okay, so if you're in a situation where you've hired 10 generators and the local fueling company is going to come and refill the gensets, every day, and they're not really going to be completely full or what have you, and you don't know whether you've emptied them out or whatever. Obviously, you're going to be able to get a total fuel invoice from the fuel provider. So that's one way that you can do it. You're not going to be able to get the specific fuel consumption for each generator. So you don't get down into that detail that you want. So that's when kilowatt hour logging, I think, is going to be quite important. But then on the flip side, I've been in a situation where we've had several quite small generators, and literally having a ute full of jerry cans and going around and filling them up that way has been sufficient. And so I guess it's a case of just working out the best way to log that fuel. I think, would you agree that it is better to know the fuel consumption per generator across an event, or do you think it's enough to know total fuel across the entire event? Would you like to be, if you were given the job of analysing the efficiency of an event's energy provision, would you be saying, I really, really, really need to know individual generator performance in order to make a good, come up with a good report and really be able to learn from that report into the future? How important is knowing?
Yeah, I think you probably do need to do both. So you've got a total consumption of the whole event, but it is better to have it individually. Say, for example, the Commonwealth Games in 2006. We actually did know the amount of fuel that went into every generator. So the refueling company would look at each plant number of each machine and give us an invoice for each machine over that event. That's how you set it up as the organiser.
Okay, so I guess that comes down to how important is this information to know, and why do you want to know it? And that's going to then direct you to how much effort you're going to put into it. So you, as an event organiser, need to decide, is this a major issue of concern that I really need to prioritise? Do I need to put resources into tracking this? Or actually, yes, that is all very important, but if I just tweak my system this little way, I'm going to be able to get the information that I need. And a lot of it is going to be engagement with staff on the ground. It could be doing things such as hanging a clipboard in a waterproof pouch or something on the side of the generator with a great big note saying, please write down when you refueled it here. You might be able to get data that way. So I guess it's a case of prioritising the issue and putting the effort in that you need to get that job done. So following on from that, I'm wondering if anyone, Abby, you might have anything to say, or anyone else actually that's on the call that's got anything to add to what we've discussed so far. If you can type a message into the chat box and let me know if you want to discuss a particular point, or if you've got anything to add to anything that's been discussed so far. I'd really love to hear some of you on the call. So please do add something into the chat box and I'll throw straight to you. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is just mute Sonia again, Steve. So I wanted to let you know about the Call to Action program that we've got going at Live Performance Australia. So we've developed lots of resources, action plans and all sorts of checklists, etc., for events, including that spreadsheet that I showed you just before. But one of the things we've realised is that we really don't know how efficient our events are running in Australia, our outdoor music events. We find that some events aren't really even tracking their fuel, the simple figure, the overall fuel figure. Now, whilst it's getting tracked through their accounts department, obviously, if they're going to be buying their fuel separate, that's there. But the event organisers concerned with the greenhouse gas emissions of their event and the energy consumption and fuel consumption of their event aren't really even going to the point of measuring fuel. So what we've done is taken that along with a step further of trying to see whether people would like to monitor their kilowatt hours and put a call to action campaign to the industry around knowing your power. So what we're hoping is that over the next year, we work with providers such as Coates and Aggreko and all of the other generator providers out there to be tracking your fuel consumption per generator and doing some metering to track kilowatt hours, so you can really see what your loads are on your generators and just how efficient you're going to be. So efficiency is going to come down to having the right number of generators for your job, having the right sized generators for your job, being as fuel efficient as possible, which comes down to loading those generators into that optimal load. That, of course, all completely comes back to knowing what your power demand is likely to be and having processes and measures in place to control power demand, especially from those pesky traders once they're there. So I think that monetizing around traders, power consumption is something to help control those. But I think it would be really interesting to meter some of the big bars and the big catering outlets to really see what their power sort of habit looks like. So we've said for everyone to put something into the chat box, and I can see that I've got a moment there coming in from Abby. Actually, Abby, I can unmute you. You can ask your question if you'd like. Hi, you're unmuted.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, it was great to hear from Coates that, you know, some machines are fitted with some of that technology, which is great. I think on site in Tassie we'll be able to monitor that fuel usage. But I just wonder, in Tasmania, that we obviously come up against lots of limitations with some of the suppliers that we have down there, and I guess we just have to chat to Coates in Tasmania to see if the machines we get are capable of that. But I just wondered, a question to some of the Coates guys, would those readings come at an extra cost when hiring the machines, or is it you know, no extra work for you guys to help with those sort of measurements?
Oh, I need to unmute them. Hang on a moment. Sorry about that. I'm just going to unmute. Okay, we should be able to hear from Steve. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Abby. First bit of an apology there. We actually were going to do that this year at the Falls Festival, and we ran into a problem. One of the guys that was supposed to take the readings and actually never took it, but that was just purely a management issue on the day that prevented that from happening. Yeah, no, you can actually take those readings yourself off the displays of the machines, and we're only too happy to show people how to use those. And so there's no other charge if that equipment's already fitted to the machine.
Okay, great. And do you know if all the machines that we had from you guys last year had those capabilities, or would we just maybe get lucky and a couple of them might have that?
No, actually, there was only a few machines out of there. I can't remember how many there were, the machines in total, but there were only a few that could have done that down there in Tasmania at the moment.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's good
All
to
right.
know. It would be really good to. It sounds like Falls Festival. You've got such a great history and knowledge within their team of to accurately estimate their power demand and match that across to their generators. So it'd be really good to sort of put proof in the pudding, as it were, and do some kilowatt hour monitoring so that they can just take it to the next level and either prove that they're how fantastic they are, or come up with any areas that they might need to tweak. So that'll be really great. Now I see a mention here in the chat box from Brett Davis, and I'm having trouble getting him onto the audio. So his chat box mention was the biggest issue with fuel consumption is oversizing. They installed two 320 kVA gensets on the main stage at Big Day Out, and it had a total load of 120 kVA. So what they're saying is, is overspec. They've overspec that by up to 200 kVA. Better education about calculating realistic loads is the key, and I think that's a really good way of finishing off this webinar for today. Is that we have produced a fantastic amount of resources and information at the Live Performance Australia, and so please do have a look at our website and have a look at those resources. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're the generator tech or a site manager that's been contracted in, and you're sort of a bit of a middleman person between generator suppliers and between power users, say stage production teams, then using some of that, those resources and pulling out some of the language and trying to have those conversations with power users to really get them to understand what the impacts are of over specking, the fact that they're wasting money, probably quite a significant amount of money, as well as, of course, wasting fuel and creating unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions. I think that they're the three things. So that's probably going to wrap us up for today. Thank you so much to everybody for coming onto the call today. We have recorded this session and it will be available online if you know of anybody that would want to hear it. You can contact us on the email on the screen, greener@liveperformances.com.au, and you can follow us on @LivePerthAust. There's also a LinkedIn discussion group. So thank you to everybody for listening today, and I'll sign off for now. Bye-bye.